Hey guys, how you doing? So welcome to the fourth and the final video for Chapter 5. In this video, we're going to take a look at adaptations for survival in the cold. We're going to mainly focus on animals, but there's a few short slides on plant adaptations for the cold as well. And then finally, we're going to finish off with looking a little bit about biomimicry and what that actually is. Okay, so let's jump into it. Okay, adaptations for survival in the cold. Now, challenges in the cold environment. I think pretty obvious, the temperature as being one of the key issues that animals and plants face living in the cold. The second one that people don't often think about is actually also water availability. So that's actually also another challenge that cold environments also experience, because the water's there, but it's locked up in ice, and so you can't really take advantage of that. And if you remember in Chapter 4, plants can't move water up and down their xylem vessels when it's frozen. And so that's also another challenge that plants need to be able to sort of get around if they're going to survive in cold environments as well. Okay. Oops. Here we go. So low temperatures being a very big one. Metabolic processes need to happen in liquid water. So under 0 degrees, they often freeze into ice, and so that's why you often find things unable to survive in cold environments, because the water in their cells will freeze into ice if they don't have some sort of method to get around that. And so that's one of the issues. The second thing is that water expands when it's frozen, and so when the water expands, it can rupture the plasma membrane and kills the cell. The water that's available is locked up as ice, and so when animals live in the cold environment to survive, they need to have a variety of different methods to either endure or escape the environment that they are in. Okay, so here's a few lists of examples that animals can do, and then we're going to take a look at a few key animals and how they survive. Antifreeze. So remember, not having your cells freeze up is a good thing. So animals can produce their own antifreeze, and they're often a substance that's made up of glycerol or amino acids or protein. And what that does is the antifreeze lowers the freezing point for water within the cell. So by having these molecules, it lowers the freezing point to around negative 18 degrees, which is pretty good for an animal to be able to survive. If you can't endure it, you kind of just escape. Birds will migrate. And so that's why great numbers of birds will migrate every year during the winters of one to find the summer of another one, or the spring of another one, and survive there. Okay, or you can escape by burrowing beneath the ground. So a lot of frogs and toads and smaller animals like marsupials and mammals that are your rodents will often burrow and stay under the burrow, because under there the temperature is a bit more constant and it's not as cold. Okay. Insulating layers. A lot of mammals need to have layers of fat to insulate them against the cold temperatures and keep them warm, particularly in the water where the temperature can get extremely cold. And for some animals, they will actually shut down for the winter. So sleeping through the winter, we have two different processes. You can either call them torpor or hibernation. Now, the key difference between the two is torpor is day-to-day hibernation, whereas your hibernation you think about in terms of bears are over the seasons, and so they'll hibernate the whole time, whereas torpor will happen through animals like snakes and things like that. Okay. Now penguins. We're going to look at one technique that penguins are able to employ. This is a part of a video that I will show you guys at a separate time. But emperor penguins are a really good example of a particular animal that survives really well in the Antarctic cold. Right? And so they are the ones that endure the winter. Most animals will leave Antarctica during the winter and find a bit more warmer ground and migrate, for example. But emperor penguins kind of just tough out the winter until the next season. And one of the ways they do that is they live in colonies. And so there's large amounts of emperor penguins that live together. And by living together, they can huddle together during the winter and stay warm. In addition to that, they also have a lot of insulating fat and also a really tough skin with a lot of feathers to provide that insulation. So you'll get a chance to take a look at some of those in the video. Okay. Another example is the mountain pygmy possum. So the mountain pygmy possum is a very small animal. And small animals don't often do very well in cold environments because of their surface area to volume ratio. They are small, so they tend to lose heat a lot more than a larger animal would. And so when you are talking about in a mountain environment where it is often cold all times of the year because of the altitude means that the air is thinner. If the air is thinner, it doesn't insulate heat as well, and therefore the environment naturally just becomes colder. The mountain pygmy possum doesn't have any fat storage in its tail, and so what it does is it actually needs to go into torpor on a regular basis. So when it goes into torpor, basically the body shuts down, reducing the amount of oxygen that it takes up. It reduces the amount of energy it requires to survive, and therefore the amount of food it needs to take up and the amount of waste it produces. It essentially shuts down until the conditions become more favorable. So they'll find a little burrow in where the temperature is a bit more constant, and then it will shut down. And so for the mountain pygmy possum, during the summer and the spring and the autumn, all the other seasons, it needs to be able to eat to basically build its reserves up, and then when it goes into torpor and shuts down, it then needs to rely on its own reserves to survive the cold. A few other things: they also have a lower heart rate, so the breathing drops, and then therefore the body temperature drops to almost your surrounding temperature. And during the torpor hibernation, it matches the surrounding environment, and it basically becomes like a cold-blooded animal, not requiring a whole lot of energy to survive, but not being able to do a whole lot either. Okay, plants do not create an antifreeze, but the plant's cytosol within their cell acts as a natural antifreeze. So as the weather cools down, the ice shards begin to grow in the plant, and what that ice shard does, it reduces the water content. Water will then move from within the cells out of the cells, and it will naturally move from in here out there, and as it moves, it turns this particular environment more hypertonic. Hyper meaning higher in its ion concentration, and as cells increase in their tonicity and become hypertonic, they actually lowers their freezing point and will freeze less likely. And then the more water leaves, the more concentrated it becomes, and the lower the freezing point will be. And so that's how plants prevent water within their xylem and phloem from actually freezing up and still allowing the plant to survive. Plants, the leaves are also fairly thin and needle-like, and that also reduces the amount of surface area to volume ratio. It reduces the amount of total surface area, and it prevents the leaves from being damaged by the ice. And so you often find that you'll find pines and your conifers living in the cold environments, not your evergreens and the ones with the really thick leaves, because those leaves will often get damaged by the ice during the winter, whereas your needle-like ones are often pretty okay. Aquatic mammals. So most aquatic mammals, your seals, your dolphins, and your whales have a high concentration of red blood cells to increase the oxygen carrying capacity, so they can stay underwater for longer, where it's a bit more kind of stable. They also have a very thick insulating layer of fat called blubber. These fat deposits sort of sit around the organs and tissues, allowing them to function the way that they do. And you can sort of see there, here is a cutout of a whale tissue at the skin. There's your skin, and then you've got this really thick layer of insulating fat. And because fat works as a really good insulator, having up to about 50 centimeters thick in some animals like blue whales, for example, allows them to retain their body heat at a stable temperature at all times, despite the fact that the water around them could literally be sitting at negative 20 or so degrees Celsius. Okay. For a lot of mammals, they also have a different method called a countercurrent exchange. Endothermic mammals will use a countercurrent heat exchange method to keep heat in their blood from leaving. Now, how it works, all mammals can do this, which is quite interesting. A countercurrent heat exchange means you are putting both your arteries and your veins close together. By having both the arteries and the veins close together, what that allows you to do is that you can exchange heat between the two environments. Blood from the artery is often warm because it's close on the inside of your core temperature, and what it does is, as it approaches the limbs, what that does is it loses heat, but as it loses heat, it loses that heat to the veins rather than through the skin. And so what you end up getting is a more stable environment closer to the core, but a lot of a lower temperature at the extremities, for example, your hands and your feet. So this diagram shows if you didn't have a countercurrent heat exchange, this is what would happen. the blood leaving the artery from the body sits at about 37 degrees, which is the core temperature of an animal or a mammal, and then it will slowly lose heat as it goes to the extremities. It will go to the extremities and sits at about 24 degrees, and what will happen is it will slowly lose heat again through the veins until it gets back to the body at 16 degrees. Now that is a real issue because it goes from 37 to 16. This is without a countercurrent heat exchange system. If it has a countercurrent heat exchange system, the veins and the arteries are closer together, and so it starts at 37, but it will lose heat faster, and it will lose the heat to the veins, and so it'll go from 37, 29, 22, and then down to 15 at the extremities. As the veins make their way back into the core temperature, it will gain heat faster through the arteries, and it might drop by a few degrees or so, but it retains most of its heat coming back into the core. And so the animal doesn't have to worry about its core temperature dropping too much. But the trade-off is that the extremities are often a lot colder, which is why, during the cold weather, you will find that your extremities will cool down really fingers. Your fingers get really slow and sluggish and cold, and your feet get really cold quicker than your core temperature does, because your arteries and your veins are so close together that any heat lost from your arteries will go to your veins, and therefore making your limbs colder, but your core temperature at a stable environment, which is what your body wants in terms of survival. Okay, so the extremities are always colder than the core, but that's okay because the core is where all your organs are and your environment is to survive. Okay. So that's it for adaptations to cold. We're going to take a look at a few examples of biomimicry. Now, biomimicry is an interesting area of science where you use modern technology to imitate natural processes in biology to improve human lives. And so you're mimicking natural biological systems, right? So I'll go through a few examples. Here's kind of like 9 examples of biomimicry that basically humans have taken this as an inspiration to technology. Some of the really obvious one is the aerodynamic nature of some biological systems. So, for example, the beak in the kingfisher is extremely aerodynamic, and that serves as an inspiration to the bullet train, right? And so by having that same kind of structure that is aerodynamic, it allows the bullet train to go faster, cut through the air, and reduce the amount of drag that the vehicle experiences. Number 2, butterflies. So the structural color, the light on the butterfly wing creates colors without dyeing process and pigments, and so butterfly wings have this really cool kind of layout that kind of changes the way the light reflects off of it, and it works really well in terms of its without having to dye it too much. And then you have these really cool super hydrophobic water repellent surfaces that allows it to repel water and become water resistant, and that's how the butterfly can stay dry during the rain, because the structure of the wings allow water to wick straight off the wing. And we use the same kind of technology for us as well to create water repellent surfaces, as well as paint coatings that are extremely reflective. Okay. The combat mini spy plane, U.S. military gave the University of Michigan about $10 million to develop a design, and so they fitted it with a solar panel in its transparent head, and it's basically like a little spy plane, that looks like a bat that flies around. It's able to collect large amounts of data, and also it runs off solar panels on the top of the wing, and basically runs on 1 watt of power. Pretty cool. Butterfly design, so architecture and design being inspired. For example, these chairs being inspired by the monarch butterfly wing structure. Velcro was actually developed in the 1940s by a Swiss engineer, and he was attempting to remove the burrs off his dog's hair, and then he realized, he looked under a microscope and he found these little microscopic hooks on the burrs, and that was an inspiration for the development of Velcro, which we know now is extremely, extremely versatile and useful in our society. Lotus Leaves have a particular structure of these little grooves on the lotus leaves. And what these little grooves do is that it prevents water from seeping in between the grooves and it prevents the lotus leaves from getting wet. So when you pour water on a lotus leaf, the water runs off pretty much kind of instantly, and because these microscopic bumps kind of just prevents the water from seeping in and sticking onto the leaf. So what they've allowed to do is it actually develops self-cleaning paint with these microscopic beads on the more bumps, and then the water just wicks right off and collects dirt and cleans the paint. Right, pretty smart if you think about it. Sharks and wetsuits. Here's a bit of an interesting story. During the London Olympics in 2012, there was an abnormally large amount of swimming records that were being broken by these swimmers who came to the London Olympics, and they were wearing these shark skin suits, which were not made up of real shark skin, but the design was very similar to shark skin. And what that actually did was it was allowed about 130 or so different records to be broken during because of these suits, right? And so now, what's the structure? The shark skin appears smooth. However, if you look at it really carefully, shark skin have very small scales called denticles. Now, these denticles here, these little grooves, what that does is they have a groove running down the length, and it channels water through these grooves, and it reduces drag by having these channels along the skin. The shark can move through the water at a faster speed by almost 60% in terms of their design. It also makes it harder for smaller microorganisms such as algae and barnacles to stick to them, and it reduces the chemicals that's needed. And so this design was kind of an inspiration to real shark skin suits, to artificial shark skin suits that swimming companies would design for their swimmers. And so when they did it, if it coated the whole body of the person, they found that it reduces the drag that the person experiences while swimming through the water. And so you end up with all these swim records getting broken because these people were using these suits were literally kind of flying through the water. And so now they've kind of reduced that and scaled it back, and only a certain amount of your body can be covered in the shark skin suit, and also for certain swimming styles as well. Okay, pretty cool. Termite dens and architecture. So Mick Pierce, an architect at Eastgate Centre in Zimbabwe, studied the cooling chimneys of termite dens, and the dens look like the homes of the termites, but in actual fact the dens are not actually, they're actually the vents. The termite mound itself sits underground, and the termites live mostly below the ground, and these vents are actually created as a cooling or a natural cooling system for the termite dens. Because out in the African desert, it gets ridiculously hot, and so the ventilation naturally wicks or naturally moves air out of the chambers, cooling down the ground just below, right? And so that serves as an inspiration to the architecture of the Eastgate Centre, which uses 90% less heat, less energy from heat to cool down than your traditional buildings. So it contains large chimneys that naturally draw the air at night to lower the temperature of the floor slabs, just like the termite dens. During the day, the slabs retain their coolness, greatly reducing the need to have air conditioning. So it's a pretty smart design based on a natural process. And finally, beetles and water bottles. So there was South Korean designers have developed a bottle that collects water from the air. And so it was inspired by these particular desert beetle that is able to collect water with hydrophilic hair structures from the morning fog. And so this the shell of the beetle contains a particular molecule that was hydrophilic, and what that does, it allows condensation to happen off the beetle's back during the nighttime a lot more, and so that collects and creates a bit of a water source for the beetle. And that was a great inspiration to these water bottles that they did. And so they did the same thing, where it contains a hydrophilic material that increases the rate of condensation for the plants, and then obviously, not plants, for the water bottle, and then that in turn allows it to collect water a lot more. Okay, so pretty neat design there. Okay, so that's it for the chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I will catch